We will, we will unshock you. This is Unshocked. Why should non Americans like me and a lot of us around here, still be friendly to Americans when they themselves hate each other? My guest and co host had this discussion quite early after the election in the US, November 2024. But unfortunately, I couldn't edit the episode fast enough. So you're watching and listening to this in late March of 2025. But forget the time this took to finish. You and I know that the question is still as ever present and as irritating as the American flag. Well, let's just say it's still the best topic to break down right now. So don't miss a beat. Here we go. Hello, everybody. This is Unshocked, and welcome back. This is episode 8, season 2. We are here to celebrate our differences. It is our belief that our differences actually make the world better. And when we stick together and appreciate what makes us different, everyone will actually live better in the long run. And so this is Reggie, and I'm joined by my constant companion, Nathan. So I'm from the Philippines. And hi, Nathan. Nathan from Australia. Hi, Nathan.
Hi, Reggie. How are you?
Doing great, doing great. And we're like maybe 3,000 miles, maybe. But
possibly, yeah. I haven't looked it up, but
Yeah,
I'd say
yeah.
3,000 miles at least.
And we're 3 hours apart right now. But in terms of background, we are very, very distant. I'm Asian and Australians. How could you describe yourself, Nathan?
A lot of people have this idea of Australians as being, I know, a little bit slow and humorous and sort of like Paul Hogan in Crocodile Dundee, that sort of, rugged outdoors types.
Yeah, you would agree that you can be distinguished from Asia.
Definitely.
So in terms of background, we're actually diverse. As promised, we are turning our attention to yet maybe a part of the world that's the farthest from the both of us.
Certainly farther away from, for me, Papua New Guinea from our last episode was close. And
yes,
this
is a bit
country
closer
is
to
a lot
both of
further
us.
away. So
Absolutely, yes. The US of A, it's the US of A. And, you're in Australia, I'm from the Philippines, and the US of A, you could say, is really at another part of the world. I am pretty certain that our topic today is on a lot of people's minds. They actually think about it, but they're not gonna discuss it the way we will. I am pretty sure that. Okay, so what do you know happened in the US recently, Nathan? Everybody knows it, but I want to hear it from you.
gee, let me think. There was obviously, there was an election that happened.
Yes, right. It's also on your mind. Yeah, it's also on your mind.
It's been on everyone's mind.
Yes. It's not just about the US. Even in Australia, you're talking about it over there.
Yes, we are. Yeah. And it's been lots of news stories about it. And there was even live coverage of it here in Australia, even though it was an election in another country, we were still getting live coverage of it here. So that's how much it meant to people in Australia.
Yeah. You would think it was just a next door neighbor because let me tell you, a lot of other places have had elections, but you wouldn't keep track of them. By the way, we're talking about the November elections in the US of 2024. Wait, full disclosure, here in the Philippines, we were not as invested in who won or not. Well, it's another matter, but I'll tell it later. But let me hear it first from you, Nathan. Why do you think we're Australians so interested in following the elections?
I think part of the reason is we're a fairly close ally of the US, and I just think the kind of divisions that are happening there in their politics is just fascinating to people around the world. And being a Western country, speaking the same language, and just the relationship we have with the United States, what goes on there, it's a little bit like dropping a stone in the water where the ripples go out. And yeah, that's sort of the American election. It's happened, and now there are sort of flow-on effects throughout the world.
I have this very recent memory of having been able to work in fast food in Australia, and one of my workmates was an Aussie, a white, and we got into a short conversation. And one of the things that I clearly remember from her was one of the items in her bucket list was actually to visit New York City because she finds it like the most fascinating place in the world.
Yes.
And which is exactly very fitting to mention here because our guest is from New York City. So I consider his insight very, very close to how the mood and temperature is right there at the moment. And the best part is we posed to our guest this question: if Americans are actually hating each other now, why should we, the rest of the world, still like them? So, put it another way, these most recent US elections illuminated what's happening in the US, where they're polarized over there. They're not agreeing on a lot of stuff. And the so called January 6 riots, where Americans stormed their own government, it gives me the impression that Americans are in real intense opposition with each other. And so if they're actually in a state where they're not liking each other very much, I asked our New Yorker guest, why should we, the rest of the world, have a different attitude? Why should we still like you? So how about you, Nathan? How does it make you feel to see them like angry at each other?
I just find it really sad. I think that this is sort of where I guess their society has come to this point where their divisions are so deep that they can't seem to get along. I would say there are elements of that in lots of Western countries. I do feel Australia, in some respects, is it's not as obvious and not as pronounced as you see. You don't see people, raiding Parliament House or anything like that here. But I think even just generally in the West, England had things like Brexit and other things like that were very divisive. I sort of have a bit of a fear that perhaps Australia could, perhaps become, at least in part, a little bit like those countries in the future. So I do feel a sense of sympathy that it's, maybe things might get worse before they get better.
Man, I've seen a lot of I don't know, Western segments of the population who do feel that whatever divisions happen in America will eventually reach their own territories. But I also have to mention that for some people like us, well, I'm saying non-Western populations, what hits different is we just sort of am unsure whether America will take the back seat and let someone else be in charge. Yeah, it's a bit different. It's a bit different. It's more like being just unfamiliar. We're just not used to this.
Yes, yeah.
All the same, it's really nothing like hearing from someone on the inside. And so, yes, it's really very valuable to us to hear from an American themselves. So, without further ado, yeah, Nathan, I conducted an interview with my good friend, and I'll allow him to take the floor. Hi, John. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Reggie.
Yeah, thank you for agreeing to be our guest.
It's my pleasure.
So, it's really my pleasure, John, to be able to talk with you like this. Can you tell the audience more about yourself?
So yeah, my name is John Cheery, and I'm American. I grew up in a small town in the middle of America, in a state called Missouri. And one of the houses I was in literally have a field in the back with cows in it. It was very pretty. And then yeah, I became a musician. I wanted to be a rock star, a drummer. I used to have long hair, not anymore. And then I got involved in recording, and I moved after college. I moved to New York City. So yeah, so currently
Yeah.
I live in New York City with my wife, and my two teenage children are getting ready to go to college. I run a company called John Marshall Media, and we produce audiobooks for the major publishers, as well as podcasts and some other types of audio programs.
Thank you for that information, John. And full disclosure, I do work with John on his projects. Yep, that's John Marshall Cheery, and I'm glad to have known him for the past few years. And when someone says they're in New York City, they have a business there, and their family is there.
So
My point is, it only struck me now. How similar our guest is with the president of the U.S. is the same. He's a New Yorker. He has his family there, and he has a business there.
well, maybe some similarities, but I imagine a lot of differences as well. Yeah, I mean, John sounds like a very well-rounded person. Even though he lives and resides in New York City, he's from the country, so he's obviously moved from the country to the city, and a self-starter because he's established his own business. So it isn't like he just inherited a lot of money and started.
Ooh, that's some
making more money.
shade.
To be honest, not really. So I would imagine his upbringing was probably quite different from our guests. So it's lots of things there that are very admirable about John, I think.
Let's dig a little deeper into his circumstances. From what you've been describing, I would say nothing is more American than being able to chase after your own dreams. Would you agree with that?
There's something about America I'm trying to understand, even as an adult. I actually last night was in an Uber, and I got talking to the driver. He was Indian, from India, and very nice guy. I like to try to start conversations with folks just to kind of learn about their lives. And he was probably the most wonderful, most positive man. And so he was 60 years old. He said he moved here at 19, so that was 40 years ago. So what would that have been in the 80s? In the 80s.
80s.
In the 80s. At 19 years old, he moved from India. Do you have family here? Did you have family here? No, we had some people that my family knew here. Oh, wow. Did you stay with them? I stayed there for about a week. I was like, wow. So he moves over here. He stays there for about a week. He has 4 children now. He was driving an Uber, and I don't know what else he was doing. And 2 of his children were in college and 2 more in high school. He lived in Queens, if I remember right. And he kept saying America. Well, he kept saying New York, which is actually funny. New York is the land of opportunity. It's an interesting. New York has its own culture, identity inside America, right? It's a very funny thing. You'll get that a lot. No place like New York, you'll get, right? You'll hear that a lot. And so he kept saying that over and over again. New York is the land of opportunity. You can do anything if you work hard. And that is the American culture. It's the dream. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy. It is my belief. There are several things involved in it, right? There's the cultural. There was a self-fulfilling prophecy. There is the truth or the lie, or certainly an idea that we are told, you can do anything, son, if you put your mind to it. If I can tell you how many times I was told that, okay, Dad, whatever. As a teenager, I would probably say, whatever, Dad, right? But it's inside us. So there is the American ethos, the cultural story, and then there's also a legal system put in place that allows these things to happen. And I'm aware of all those things. And so we are a massive beneficiary of the legal system, but also really of that story that the cab driver told me. You work hard, you can get anything. And it's something that we believe, and because we believe it, it's true.
And this is very interesting for me, Nathan, because he was talking about New York, but I think it would hold true for America in general, in this case. People from many backgrounds would say that America is the land of dreams. You just have to work hard and you'll get there. I'm from the Philippines, and a lot of Filipinos would share that sentiment. I'm not sure about you, Nathan. Like I said, we're from different backgrounds.
Mhm.
What is your take on that?
I mean, I kind of see how that's an ideal that is portrayed through America, but I guess it's also an ideal that you see portrayed in their media that is sort of beamed around the world. I guess makes them feel that way. Whereas you don't sort of perhaps don't get that same kind of thing from Australian media. Being from Australia, I don't know that there are very many Australians that would feel like, at least from a certain economic background, would feel like they would need to go to America to have a better life. There's a pretty sizable portion of Australia that are pretty glad that they're Australian, and if you ask them if they think that they should go to America because it's a land of opportunity, would probably say no, and feel that there's really just the same amount of opportunity here in Australia. Arguably, in some ways, life in Australia in some respects would be even better than life in America. That's my opinion anyway.
But, coming from my background, I can understand why we're already going to be partial to the idea that there is a place where you can be what you want. Having an idea that America is a land of opportunity already makes you sort of partial to wanting to be close to Americans.
Yes.
It's like even you yourself, Nathan, you wouldn't especially be wary of Americans based on their normal profile. You wouldn't think that you should be too cautious around them.
No, not at all. I know a number of Americans and live and work here. I get along very well with them.
Yeah, me too. Actually, yeah, I work with Americans. But here's the thing. Our topic is why should we like Americans? Because they somehow appear to be not liking each other very much now. People like you and me, we wouldn't necessarily want to think that we should be cautious around them.
Yes.
But I put the question to John, right? You're an American and you have all these fellow Americans around you. Would there be any reason at all for you to feel cautious around them? It's like after the election, something is giving an impression that Americans might actually hate each other more. Do you have a sense of that fellow Americans are wary of each other?
I mean, we do see that division, right? And we are aware of it. And it's unfortunate that we need to be careful talking to each other. And that's really sad. My dad tells a story of when he grew up, in the 1950s, right? Imagine those old cool cars they used to have in America back in those days, right? And that's what I imagine. And he remembers his mom and dad every Sunday they would host a card game in the kitchen. And of course, dad was not invited. He didn't want to be there as a kid, but he would always hear them laughing and joking and talking about politics. And they would tease each other. They would joke, "Oh yeah, well you like this guy because ha 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 ha." Yeah. And then they'd all, finish their card game and go home and then come back next Sunday. And somewhere along the line, that seemed to have disappeared. And there are these different narratives now. And one of the things that I found actually strange is that when you actually dig into, if you start asking a lot of questions about the political differences, there are very few actual differences between political views until this last cycle came up about, and that was the big thing about them taking our stuff, immigrants taking our jobs, foreign countries taking our, and that became sort of the like where we have the people on the left, as we say, right, which are typically Democrats over here saying, well, might not be totally true. And if it is true, your way to fix it is not the right way. But really, the differences are very subtle. But it's a shame that we cannot have those discussions. And now I live in New York, and New York is very liberal. We're very, democratic, and we're all the same, And so, but if you go in the Midwest or some other smaller regions, then it's very Republican, we call it. And it's a shame. It's a shame.
I would like to say, Nathan, that it's not just John who's saying this, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's particularly around election time. We always get these documentaries about American politics and all these news stories. It just sort of tends to dominate a lot of our media here. A bit like watching a soap opera, I guess. But I think even in Australia, I am careful about what I say around certain people too, or expressing my opinions. On social media, I think has a lot to do with some of these divisions that we're seeing. I think it's one of the key factors into why our sort of society is fracturing in the way that it is in the West.
It's reached the point where sometimes it's difficult to determine where it really came from, what the turning point is in a certain discussion that leads to so much animosity. We were used to talking about our differences before,
yes,
without having to be so heated about it.
And I think it's very visible in America, but it's not just an American problem.
Which is why, Unshocked. We're raising the banner. We can talk about our differences. There's no
That's
problem.
right.
Yup. Let me just remind everyone that you are viewing and listening to a program that says our differences make this world a better place. We like you to hear from us about that. But of course, we would also like to hear from you. So go and make your comments, make your voices heard, and be honest. And do that for all our other episodes. We've loads of discussions in previous episodes, and they're all absolutely great. So give them a watch, give them a listen. It's really important to swim into topics that might seem uncomfortable at first, but really, they work out in the end. So let's go back to our current program, and let's hear each other out. What are your observations? Would there be any indication that some Americans would have something against non-Americans? I mean, they don't even.
I know. So, and that's the thing that I find very well. Okay, there's the perception, because what's happening now is that we've had this very high inflationary period, right? So now what's happening is, and I notice it. I make a lot of money relative to most people, and then when I go out to eat now, I'm like, holy moly, this is very expensive. I'm aware of it. We make great money. Everything's fine. But I'm imagining people in like a more kind of normal, it becomes very painful. So you become, right? So we're becoming like, oh, wow, what am I going to do without? What am I going to do without? That's hard. That's hard for anyone psychologically. And so when that happens, who are we going to blame? I ain't going to blame myself. It ain't my fault, Reggie. It's your fault. I mean, that's just unfortunately psychologically what happens, right? And in groups, we tend to do that, right? But yet I don't see people interacting because there's a lot of immigrants there. And I don't see anyone being rude to the immigrants in person. I don't see it. So that's the thing. There's the political stance, and then there's the interpersonal. And those two things have a wide gap. And that I find a little alarming, that we're not able to say, hey, are we questioning what we're doing here, right? I mean, how are we interacting with each other? And how is that communicating with the people?
Let me just ask you, Nathan, you also come into contact with people from different backgrounds than yours.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when you do chance upon them, it's not going to be a case of you against them.
No, definitely not.
On a face-to-face basis, there's nothing there. But could you say that underneath, I mean, It's not specifically you, but the community. Would the community have something under the covers?
As he said, there's the interpersonal as well as, I guess, political. I mean, I think we all like to put on a certain face to the world or present a certain view of ourselves to the world, to everybody, and then, behind closed doors, the masks come off, so to speak. I
Yeah.
think that's true of everybody. You're not going to go up to someone and tell them you don't like them to their face, even if you don't like them, but that sort of thing. Or maybe some people do, but it's more subtle ways. But
You kind of feel it when someone sort of takes a sideways view at you.
Yeah, I guess tribalism is not just an American problem. It's here in Australia. It's in Europe. It's in Britain. We're just seeing it at the moment, I guess, more so in America.
Interesting that you mentioned tribalism because we have actually covered the notion of a tribe ourselves during Unshocked Season 1, Episode 4. So, shameless plug. We were brilliant there. You should listen to us when we talk about, what a tribe actually is. And are you sure you're not already in one? Again, that's Unshocked Season 1, Episode 4.
Again, you don't see it as much in Australia, but even recently there was in a country town in Australia, there was a group of Nazis marched down the main street, which was something you wouldn't see happened a number of years ago, and that was quite shocking. Never expected to see that.
So really, ethnic supremacy.
In
short,
it's that notion of tribalism, and it's taken to an extreme level.
Absolutely, yeah, exactly.
This is almost like something that's jumped off the page of a novel and come into reality somehow.
Yeah, and the reason why you also brought up the Nazi rally is because of the issue surrounding migration and
immigration sort of policy has been sort of, I guess, a bit of a hot button issue in a lot of countries, including Australia.
As we've seen in we keep repeating, the latest U.S. elections. It seems that migration has become a leverage for the current elected president in the U.S. This isn't something that just arose recently, right?
No, it's not a new concept.
Some people would say there's not much difference anyway between what's happening now and the past. Ever since the U.S. became a nation, because again they had slaves, and slavery was a kind of practice that separated people into the superior group and the inferior group. It's a running theme, and maybe for a time racial conflict was so tumultuous in the States, and then they got it under control for some time. But it seems that the divide is emerging again. So I had to really ask John, what does he, an American, think is really happening? You've just been through an election period, and it would appear that the election results would lean towards predominantly a sentiment that says America is becoming isolationist, in contrast to what it was before, where it seemed to want to be friends with everybody. The friendly banter or the friendly disposition is getting less.
Yeah.
Is becoming less. So there's a sort of turning away from everybody else.
From my understanding, the feeling is that the economy, inflation's gone up a lot, which is factually true, right? And that there are two things involved in that. One of them is that there are too many immigrants taking Americans' jobs. That's their feeling. I don't agree nor disagree. Data tends to argue against that, but that's not what we're here to discuss. And everyone's taking advantage of us, right? Or taking our jobs, that's kind of what it feels like, right? Is they are taking our jobs, whoever they are. It was actually interesting. My daughters are applying for college. And though, as it happens in the States, a lot of the colleges in the Northeast, the small colleges, are in these very small towns. And I live in New York City, and my daughters were raised here in New York City. So that's all they know. Right? So we were driving around these towns, and we would go through these towns, and there would be these enormous red brick buildings, which are factories, full, and they're abandoned. They're abandoned factories that were built, I don't even know, in the early 1900s, perhaps, right? Maybe they made clothing or typewriters or all kinds of things, right? And it was really interesting for my daughters. What is that? That's a factory. And so they have lived through this election cycle. And so when they were like, wait a minute, so there were manufacturing jobs here. And I was like, yes, there were back in the old days, and even a little bit when I was a kid, back in the 70s and 80s. And that's when all those jobs started going away, and they went away for economic reasons. So that's terrifying to us here. That's terrifying. Now, the thing is, in my opinion, the time to be terrified is quite over. This ship has sailed, and it's an economic reality, right? In the end, the reason why I have a closet full of clothing is because now they're manufactured in China, and a shirt now can cost as low as $5, which I have no clue how a t-shirt can cost $5 with everybody's markup involved in that. But when I was a kid, when in the 70s, clothing was very expensive. My mom actually made some of my clothes. We were not wealthy. My dad was a teacher, and my mom didn't work. And so we made a good living, but by American standards, and we're very spoiled. we make a lot of money relative to the rest of the world. We have a lot of spending power. It's something I'm thankful for every day. One of the many things about living in this country it's very nice. And costs have gone down dramatically for us, right? We can buy a lot of crap that we don't need. But yeah, like I said, so my mom I remember her with her sewing machine. It was cheaper for her. She used to go to a store. There was a fabric store in town. Actually, my grandmother owned a fabric store in a different town, and she would buy fabric, and she would buy a pattern, and she would make my clothing, right? And it fit great. It was custom made. And so that's all changed, right? That's unheard of now. I tell my daughters that your mom made your clothes. Yeah, she did. So these things are all different. And so when we drive through these towns and we see these old factories that used to make the clothing that people wore, it was very expensive, relatively, right? Probably, I don't even know what, I'd be making it up, 5 or 10 times what clothing costs now, because it was made by locals. So, but now those jobs are gone. Now, important thing to note, unemployment is historically low in the U.S. All these data points exist. So that, but our jobs have been stolen by China or wherever, and they are the reason why we are, or you don't have a job, or whatever the idea is a sentiment that won the majority of the voters in the U.S. And so, we'll see where this goes. But that's the way I see it, is that they took our jobs, and that was the feeling of the majority of Americans.
I relate to so much of what he said. I mean, from the idea of his mum making his clothes when he was a kid, my mum used to do the same when I was a kid in the 1980s. And not that I would ever describe us as poor, but we were also not wealthy, and we would get new clothes, particularly on special occasions. But my mum, we would save money by my mum making clothes. And similarly, Australia had a number of good car manufacturing plants in Adelaide, outside of Adelaide, South Australia. They're gone.
Okay, yeah.
So yeah, manufacturing has sort of taken a nosedive in Australia. And it made us realise, well, we need to get back into manufacturing again. But it's not exactly going forward in leaps and bounds. But it's sort of made people, I guess, realize perhaps it's not such a good thing to always be outsourcing a lot of our labor and things. Yeah, we're certainly not going to reopen those car plants again, you know. Another thing he said was about how, you know, how he said he has a closet full of clothes because by and large they're a lot cheaper than what they were because they're manufactured overseas. And it's the same here, you know, a lot of, you know, my computer, my TV, most of my clothes, all manufactured overseas. So it's so much cheaper to buy it that way. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't understand why anyone would, you know, why would you start a clothing manufacturing plant in Australia again? Why would you start building TVs here again? Because, you know, you can't compete, you know, with the overseas product because it is so much cheaper.
And when you really consider it, a lot of it really has to do with economic opportunity.
Absolutely.
You know, if you consider that I suddenly got rich, and because I'm rich, I suddenly have all these relatives coming to me, all these people I don't know, and they want to get on my good side because I can be generous, you know,
Sure.
yeah, and suddenly I feel that they're taking advantage. When there's a feeling that economic benefits are being siphoned away by a certain group of people, yeah, I could see how it would make me feel sort of resentful.
Yeah, resentment is the word I was thinking of, yeah.
Some people aren't simply resentful. Some people are really full of rage. Going back to the scenario of America becoming rich, this is what John actually said, and yeah, it's a good listen.
In the American, I don't know, culture, the story of Americans, which really is very new, really since World War One, right? So what is that, 1910?
17, yeah, the tens.
Okay. Was America was a rise, well, after World War One, right? It was a rising economic power. Everything, and so the narrative, that's our modern narrative culture, is that my children will do better than me. And that was what we were always raised with, right? Is that, and it was always true. We always heard the story of like, oh my God, you know what, the story that I loved about Pa Joe. Pa Joe was my I guess my great grandfather, and Pa Joe was a World War One veteran, and he was so strong. His job was shoveling coal and wheat out of train cars when he that was his job, you know, like, yeah, hard work, right? And then but then you know, his son got a job in a he actually was a printer, which in the old days was a big deal. 4-color printing was like the big technology. It was a union job, right? A union job. And that was and he was able to send with a union job, one income. Grandma didn't work for a long time. He sent my dad to a private college, which is very expensive, you know, very expensive thing to do, but he just was a worker, right? And then my dad became a teacher and was able to send me to a private college as well. And I've made more money than my father. But now what's happening is that narrative is now changing, because I have been very, very, very fortunate and, you know, done much better than financially, much better than my parents. But my generation, this is the first generation where that is not necessarily true, that we are doing better than our parents. And we're now starting to see a time when our children are doing worse financially than us. And we're now getting to be, it's funny, I was just having dinner with some friends the other night, again, you know, very, very well off American couple, who was talking about how they've just had one of their children graduate college, and she is going to be moving back with them. That is not something that we in America do. I mean, have done. Normally, we went out, we immediately got jobs, made our way in the world, got our own place away from our families. And so when we start to see this being the narrative of the kids living in our basements, that is a narrative that is changing. We're all kind of wrapping our heads around, wait a minute, are our kids going to live with us? And for us, that's terrible. Like it's not what we know. And when things aren't what you know, it scares you.
Yes, you can see, but I'm just nodding my head because I relate so much to everything you're saying. Talking about moving back with your parents, I mean, this podcast is being recorded from my bedroom that I grew up in and slept in since I was a kid. I mean, obviously, I moved out of home, but moved back in, for by and large, economic reasons. Certainly, I think this notion of home ownership, which was a very strong part of Australian identity growing up, everyone, similar thing to what John was saying, you moved out of home, you either got your degree, which once upon a time was free, or you studied a trade and you went out and worked, and you had to work hard, but the job was secure and you had a secure income and you were able to pay off a house with one wage. And that's out of the question now, really, in Australia. So, yeah, we're really going to have to adapt to, I guess, new circumstances. I think a lot of this notion of people taking away from us and our life is not as good as previous generations, and somehow that's because of people taking our jobs or this immigration. I think a lot of it is just based on fear. I really think it is based on fear. But, yeah, I mean, to some extent, like our parents seem to have to work a lot harder than we do and had to make do with a lot less. But at the same time, successfully, their generations got wealthier from, the previous generations. And we seem to have a lot now, or our expectations are that we should have a lot. And I think we've kind of plateaued a bit economically and socially.
Yeah, I understand.
Which people sort of don't like, but at the same time, it's like, I think in some respects, maybe our expectations are a little bit too high in terms of what we think we should have or what we deserve.
Beautifully said. Yeah, beautifully said.
And I think that, I guess there was there was a lot more job security back then than there was now. And home ownership was, I don't know if I want to say easy, but was very possible, even on one wage, which is not now. So, yeah, as Bob Dylan said, the times they are a-changing, and there's a bit of fear about what the future holds. How are the next generation going to, live? Are their lives going to be as good as ours, or are they going to be worse off? Are we starting to go backwards? And there's a certain fear around that, which I think in some respects is valid, but I think it's a problem when politics and certain politicians, I guess, use that as a means of perhaps making immigrants or certain sections of society a scapegoat for that. It's really just, again, a political tool, and it's capitalizing on people's fear.
You could say it's pretty hard to define who's a migrant in the States, because many people come from different ancestries.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you were in John's position, you're living in a country of many immigrants, and there have been many changes, and people have had to adapt to each other. That's why they call it the American experiment. This is something really new, and I think the founders, maybe the first ones who got the machine going, thought, hey, this is going to be great for the next 200 years. But suddenly it went to a direction that nobody foresaw, which is you're both Americans, but you're wary of each other, and you're both Americans. And additionally, you have this wariness to non-Americans in your midst.
Yes.
How would someone like John figure all of that out? And I did ask him about that, and he did actually try to make sense of a lot of it.
One thing I want to point out is, so I have a very unique perspective growing up in the Midwest. When I went to high school, a little town called Neosho, Missouri. The population was 10,000 people in my little town. There was a movie theater there that couldn't stay open. It would say somebody would open it, and it would open for a couple of years, and it would go out of business. It was that small of a town, and farms all around it. Everybody was white in my school. There was 2 black children, if I remember correctly. And I realize now there were Hispanic people. I was not, what I'm saying, Reggie, I was not aware of race I didn't know Hispanic people. I didn't know. I saw the black people. I didn't know that we were supposed to be prejudiced. Even it was such a different environment that it was no. Remember, this was back in the 80s, 70s, 80s. There was no internet. There was no like. I didn't know anybody from anybody else, and it was nice because we didn't even know to be prejudiced against anyone. It's in a very embarrassing story. I didn't realize that a lot of those girls I thought were very pretty. They were Hispanic. I just thought they had nice tans. I didn't know. And it was actually a very nice thing to grow up in. But now when I go back, there are a lot of Hispanic people. A lot of them don't speak English. And so it's a little shocking to say, look around, everything's different now. You got all these people who don't speak English and it's a little bit, it's frightening, I think, to people, right? I remember my grandmother, she passed many, many years ago. She was very worried about that. That was strange to her. It was very weird. We'd never seen that before. And one of the things that I would like to point out is that America is singularly unique in how diversified its population is. Because I've been a lot of different places, and you rarely see like in New York. I mean, nobody's white. I'm a minority. That's not true. Nobody's white, but really, we literally are a minority. We are only like 30% or something, or white people in New York.
He was describing New York City, and he says that you probably have a image of New York City as majority white population because it's the financial center of the world. But he makes a great case for the reality, and I think you also find echoes of that in Sydney, maybe?
Thinking of New York as being white, well, yeah, I kind of get that in the sense that, I guess I watch a lot of American movies set in New York, and they tend to be, mostly white. Friends,
Friends,
whatever,
Friends.
and just
Seinfeld,
like
I think. Seinfeld,
yeah.
they're supposed to be all in New York.
So I guess perception is not reality, and you can't always trust what you see on TV and film, of course. But
if I took a snapshot of some parts of Sydney and posted it on social media,
absolutely,
it's like some of those pictures might not be perceived as being filmed or taken.
What you would think as typical
Sydney.
Australia of what you would think, you
Yes.
think of Australia as being. Then you go out into the western suburbs, and it's very Asian. Some parts are much more, Bankstown, Lakemba, a lot of Middle Eastern. In the sense, white people could be seen as a bit of a minority in Sydney. There's still plenty of white people there, but yeah, absolutely. Sydney in particular is very multicultural.
Which gets me to thinking that all this having to adapt to different backgrounds in the middle of so much change, right?
Yes, yeah.
I find it impressive that, even in the middle of that mix, some incompatibilities, even in little things, right? That someone like you or John can still manage to be accommodating.
Yeah.
And it was amazing when my daughters were watching the Olympics. When they watched the Olympics, the Americans, you never knew what color they were going to be. They were Asian, they were like whatever. But if you saw the Philippines team, they were all Filipino. You see the Chinese team, they're all Chinese, every one of them. And my daughters were like, whoop. And by the way, that is the single best argument for diversity I have ever seen. Not one of the reasons why we're so good is not because, of course, we have a bigger population, we have better training, yes, of course. But we have everyone. If you look at I think it was the ping pong team, they were all Asian, and that's the American team, right? And I'm very proud of that. But it's hard to make that work when we no longer have the same culture. We were all pretty much Christian before, mostly all white. We are making a transition, and one of the things I will ask is that this is a hard transition. And we are making a mess of it. And that happens. And so I will say that it is hard. We're doing our best, but we are the first culture in the world to try to integrate like this. This is us trying to figure it out, and we're making a mess of it. and when we apologize.
I think there's a lot more people like you, John, and myself
Mm.
who certainly recognize that it's going to be difficult, but
Mm.
hate is not going to be the way out of this.
No.
Even if it is really difficult, you didn't have to listen to what other sectors might they find it better to preach hate.
Mm.
In short, they find
Mm.
it better to preach hate because
Mm.
if you're living in a society that sort of sees the
Mm. Mm.
negative character of the people around you, I really had to ask him, John, you're an American. What do you find so very likable about non-Americans? In your experiences, what would you find easy to like about people who aren't really American?
What I find is that essentially we're all the same. When I approach people, I always like to ask questions, and because I'm always trying to learn, right? And as long as I do that, I kind of feel like we're all the same. The language is of course a problem, right? I mean, I don't I don't speak anything except for English. I don't, and that's also a very embarrassing thing about Americans, right? When we think we speak a foreign language, we just speak English louder, right? It's nice to meet you. I know, sorry, And that's another, by the way, embarrassment of riches that Americans have, is that everybody now speaks English. But it's also, I remember a long time ago, this was back in the 90s, going to Portugal. It was my first trip out of the country, Portugal, my honeymoon with my wife. And a lot of the people in the bigger towns were speaking English. And I remember apologizing, because I only spoke a couple of words of Portuguese just from the little book that I bought. And I was like, I don't know, apologizing for it. And the guys were saying, no, this is great. At least fine, it was English. Lucky you Americans, it was English. But now we all at least have a common language, right? So now the world seems to share, for now, English as a common language, and that helps us all relate. Because now, when I just went to Europe a summer or two ago, everywhere we went, we spoke English, and I would hear people from Germany, whatever, try to speak, and then boom, they'd all speak English. The Germans would speak English to the French, right? And that would be the way that it was, and so it made a very nice cultural. But for me to say, what do I appreciate about non-Americans? When I speak to individuals, except for the language, there's very little difference with the people. There's never a difference with people. Their experiences are very different. And I love to hear about the experiences, So it's just, I just feel like we're all the same, Reggie. I just do.
How about you? I mean, Nathan, you've come across Americans. I'm pretty certain. And
Definitely.
can you say something you like about them at least?
It's funny because it should be such a simple question to answer. But I mean, certainly the Americans I've met, I've definitely liked. I mean, anybody who comes from another country and you get to meet them, I think is always a little bit fascinating to me. I mean, I'm not somebody who's, I guess, particularly talkative or outgoing, so I don't necessarily approach foreigners. But, when I do meet foreigners and do strike up a conversation with them, it's always like, oh, this person's different. Yeah, I've seen so much American media, films and TV in Australia, so I already have a fairly good idea or what's portrayed to me about America. That's not always the reality. And so I guess following up on that and talking to them and finding out about what's true and what's portrayed is not true and what is always fascinating. So generally speaking, Americans, particularly tourists, but even Americans who live here now, they particularly look at our beaches and things and our animals and our flora and fauna, and they sort of are fascinated by it and really love it. It's exotic to them, and that sort of makes me think, oh yeah, that makes me appreciate again what I have. So that's a good thing. It's another positive quality about Americans I like too.
I'd have to say that I am from a country where the Americans have made a very big imprint. I could actually mention a lot more because there's a particular attitude that the American visitors bring.
Mhm. Mhm.
They like to explore possibilities. I have to admit that among Filipino locals, life can be very narrow. The
Mhm.
set of possibilities can be so few. There are some aspirations that were never there before. So, talking about what I like about Americans, actually,
Sure.
I try to do the best I can, and this is what I said. Let me just give an example about what I like about Americans. Let me give an example in our own country. I like that the Americans are able to make the Filipinos see how wonderful the Philippines really is. The Americans are able to make the locals aware how the scenery of the oceans really are, how valuable the oceans are under the surface, how valuable the environment is. The
Interesting.
Americans are able to develop the capabilities of the natural environment. Like you can grow lots of varieties of rice here. And it was the Americans who started that. So it took the Americans to somehow bring to the locals what potentials there are in rice production.
Interesting.
Things like
Interesting.
that. And the Americans have brought a lot of ideas about entertainment here that wouldn't have
Yeah.
been
Yeah.
considered before, like bringing movies here during the pre-World War II period. Just the attitude of being able to develop new ways of doing stuff.
One of the
Out,
things
out.
that you said, I thought one of the things you said that I thought was very interesting was is that,
Mm.
Americans have helped Filipinos understand the beauty and the uniqueness of the oceans and what's under the oceans as one thing. So, right, what I've heard is that we all take what we have for granted.
Yeah, sometimes it takes the foreigner to tell you what you should be thankful about. Being an American, I imagine you invite a lot of attention and
Mm.
you get all sorts of reactions from everyone in the world.
Mhm.
It's unavoidable. It's
Mm.
like something that you wouldn't always be able to manage
Mm.
the effect that it creates in people. I certainly have heard of how some Australians,
Mm.
some Australians I've met seem to tell me that Americans look at Australia as some back country.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like I don't know how to characterize it, but it's an oblique way of disliking an American, something that they perceive about Americans. So
Yes. In the same way that you see a lot of American culture, in TV and films here in Australia that doesn't always give you a particularly true depiction of all Americans. A lot of our media is the same. And when you think of Australians, the typical Australian sort of icons are people like Paul Hogan, Crocodile Dundee, and Steve Irwin,
it's
who are
always
both
been mentioned.
these Australian kind of what we call ochre, which is just they're
Okay.
very. I
There
mean,
was
it's
a
just
stick in your mind. Is that it?
yeah, yeah. They're
You know,
just it's a particular depiction of how Australians behave, and it's not true. Most Australians aren't like that. Most Australians don't go out and just catch crocodiles and things like that, or live in the outback. And
some Australians at least
yes,
feel that that's how Americans see them
I think
as.
so a little bit, and people from a lot of countries.
Okay,
I guess
okay.
if that's all they see, if that's the only depiction they see of Australians, then I guess that's the picture that they're gonna be stuck with in their minds.
I remember the comedic bit in Paul
Mm,
Hogan's Crocodile
mm.
Dundee where he
Yeah,
was unfamiliar with the flushing action
toilets,
of the.
yes. When he was in New York,
It stuck to me. Yeah, he was in New
yeah,
York and
yeah,
it was like he didn't really know how flushing
yeah.
toilets worked.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how true it is that depiction sort of resonated with Americans because it's hard
Mm,
to judge. And
mm,
yeah, it's like some Australians seem to think that Americans have a low opinion of them. That's why it's
mm.
like, okay, I'm gonna throw a low opinion of you
Yeah.
too. So
Mm,
it's like a
mm.
feedback loop. Probably
Yes.
doesn't have any grounding in reality.
Yeah, I think
It's
you're
like
right.
a false perception.
Mm,
Yes, everyone, preconceived notions can really, really strain the nerves. And it's actually more helpful, it's easier, it's more relaxing if all of us really just take the time to understand why other people act different or believe differently than we do. Explaining our differences is what we do all the time here at Unshocked. In fact, earlier in the episode, I remember that our participants, John and Nathan, talked about how distressing it could be for many Westerners to reach adulthood and still live with their parents. Actually, in a previous episode of Unshocked, we discussed how totally fine and totally acceptable it is for many people in other cultures to live under the roof of their elders, even have children there. Yep, even have their own children there. And if you're curious to see how that works out, tune into our season 1, episode 3. We also have episodes on whole communities not using toilet paper. Yeah, I mean, memories of COVID. And yes, by the way, we also have an episode on eating dogs for food. Yeah, we do talk about that. Yes, we did. And how other cultures actually have a big problem, a big beef, we could say, with people who eat beef. And you know what? When you learn about these things, it's actually giving you a pleasant time. The positive vibes, they just soothe and calm you down. And so, yes, please check out our other episodes. And hopefully, your stress levels won't go ballistic when you meet different people. I'll bring you back to our present topic, and let's continue taking the temperature down. Would you have heard of Americans sort of throwing their identity as Americans around? Would you have encountered anyone who sort of wants to broadcast right ahead, right in front of your face, that I am an American?
It's an excellent question, and I've heard of that concept of apologize to any Americans that might be watching or listening. That there's
Yeah, yeah. Please, please, yeah.
yeah,
Apologies in advance to any
yeah,
American who
a
might be.
certain arrogance
Apologies
about
to John.
Yeah, a certain arrogance about Americans or something like.
Oh, you heard it from the Australian. You heard it from the Australian. but I won't hold you to it, man. I know that you won't be alone with what in your own thoughts. You won't be alone there. I've heard similar.
Yeah, you also hear that the English are kind of, because we're Australians and
yes,
we're a colony of convicts, and so the English thought they were better than us, and so we always had this kind of rivalry with them because of that.
And sorry if this might not sound comfortable to some American friends I know, or some in the audience. This is not supposed to be very funny. There was a YouTuber. His name was Elliot Eastman. Elliot Eastman, that's Elliot, and Eastman is an Eastman. He's an American. I think he married someone here in the Philippines, and he stayed in one of the more remote areas. And he was posting videos about his life in a rural part of the southern Philippines, if I remember correctly. I think there's been some comments circling around that he was, or the impression was, it's not like he was throwing his weight around, but he was very aware of his distance and difference from the locals.
Mhm.
Regretfully, he was actually killed, and the American embassy is actually coordinating with local authorities to find out what actually happened. But there are a lot of social media posts commenting that Mr. Eastman unfortunately didn't gauge the room very well. Like he
Yeah, I
didn't
understand what you
he
mean. Yeah.
didn't take the temperature well.
Mm.
He had a wrong perception of how he should go about things in his environment. This isn't
So perhaps
this isn't
he's.
definitive, but
Mm.
that's what's going around the discussions
Yeah.
when it comes to Elliot Eastman.
Yes.
And this is the point about how do you present your do you present your best at all times, right? Do you show only what you think other people will like everywhere
Yes.
around you? And I think when it comes to Americans, I've seen some behavior. I don't want to generalize, but I've seen
Mm.
particular behavior where American visitors don't seem to care how they appear to the people around them.
Yeah.
Like they can act however they want to act without having to think about how other people around them will think. It's not an exclusive American thing, definitely. No.
Absolutely. I feel the same way, not so much I've seen it, with other Australians when I've travelled, but, I can say that, sometimes the way Australians act abroad is pretty, I don't know, pretty shameful at times.
Okay. You heard that from an Australian, but
Mm. And
I can
again,
also
that's,
say
and
that.
again, and again, I don't think that's true of all of us, but, it has to be said, and,
Yeah, this is
so,
unshocked. We should unshock people. And I'm not singling out just Americans, but it just so happens this is an episode about America. How visitors here at least are a bit more relaxed in how they act.
yes.
And John, being someone who likes to always be friendly to everyone, I kind of asked him, does he feel that he has to present his best qualities every time?
Everywhere, if you're talking about, I'll answer the question as I understand it. When I go anywhere, and I do get to travel a fair bit, I just try to be nice to everybody. And right, so whenever I go somewhere, I don't want to be treated as an American. I want to be treated as me. We are who we are. And so I always try to greet people with great deference and respect, and what with the benefit of the doubt. And that's what I would always like to be as well. I don't want to be thought of, oh, he's American.
One of the great insights John offers is how being a New Yorker can be perceived negatively by the rest of the other Americans.
So I live in New York, like I said, and New York, it's one of the things I find interesting about our conversation is New York has a reputation in America that is similar to the way America has to the outside world. Everything about New York is huge in scale, mythical practically, right? Like whenever I grew up in the Midwest, imagining New York, and I didn't know what it was. Like we would see it in movies, and of course in the, and I don't know, I didn't know what it was. I grew up in a little bitty town. I didn't get it, right? And it's easy to be scared of things we don't understand. And so, so the view from the outside is it's untouchable, it's unknowable. Everyone there is so pretty and smart and sophisticated and stylish, right? And that can create, and then you see, of course, all the businesses are in New York. Everything comes out of New York, right? Everything, either LA or New York. Everything comes out of there. In the same way that everything comes out of America to the rest of the world. So I think I do have a little bit of a unique perspective on that. And I have heard people say, oh, well, you New Yorkers look down on us. And I remember thinking, we do? Oh, I didn't get the memo. So there is a lot of us and them thing that I believe has been used by many in the media, certainly, that, whenever they say that, oh, you New Yorkers look down on us, they believe it. And they're rude to me. And I've had it happen. And I'm sort of like, I don't look down on you, but now I actually do. Because now you're being rude to me and you're acting, whatever, like you're unsophisticated or you're rude. And so I have found that whenever, like my daughters would go, when they were little girls, I would go back to visit my family in Missouri. and they would ask for things that they just don't have on menus in the Midwest. I can't remember. Like they want sushi, and people in the Midwest are like, they don't eat, now they do, but they don't so much eat sushi, right? It's an unusual thing. And my mom would always be like, oh, well, apologizing to the waitress, because I always made my daughters order, even as soon as they could talk, I always made them order themselves to build their confidence. But, and my mom would always kind of embarrassed apologize. Oh, well, they're from New York, which sort of made them other, which made my daughters uncomfortable, as opposed to being like, well, fine, they're from New York, but they just wanted a food that you didn't have, and that's really all there is to it. It's not that they're fancier, and so that's, and I think this segues nicely into what you're talking about. One of the things that I need to be careful of is that I know that Americans, we are very big and very brash, right? And the word brash, it's kind of a vocabulary word, right?
Well,
Very, very.
I think I read somewhere in CNN that it's Europeans who describe Americans as saying what's on their mind. That's what I remember. It's the Europeans who have that opinion, and I think
Yeah.
it's a lot of other people's opinion. I think it's not just the Europeans.
Oh, because I think it's true. Because I think now that's a cultural thing, right? And we need to be careful about that, right? Culture is important, and we need to be aware of these things, right? And so whenever I travel, I need to be very aware that the way I do things is not the right way to do things. It's just the way I do them. I try to tread lightly to understand that I am in their culture. I want them to be comfortable with me. And I try to remember not to be the brash American, because we do that. It is our superpower, and a superpower is not all good. It's good and it's bad. And we need to recognize that.
You just heard, a lot of insights from John, and what I liked about it was he was very honest about, at least about New Yorkers. It just comes naturally to them that they maybe look for stuff in the, like he said, the Midwest,
Mhm.
but that's only in New York, and the Midwest can't really provide that. But it's taken negatively by the Midwesterners, same way that maybe I think Americans themselves act when they're outside, when they're visiting other places, and they maybe get too lost in the idea that what they have in the States, they can also have everywhere else.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I mean, I have observed and have seen that sort of brashness in Americans who've traveled, and it sometimes is featured even in American movies. I've seen Hollywood movies about Americans who are traveling overseas, and even they're perceived that way. So they're obviously aware of it in some respects, and it's kind of, I guess, parodied in films. So, but again, I certainly haven't seen that or of all Americans. And, particularly Americans most of the Americans I know I've met in Australia, and they don't all come across that way. And I guess some of that is also because they've travelled overseas, and by experiencing other cultures and even living in other cultures, it kind of, I guess, rubs a bit of that brashness off, and they, I guess, learn a little bit. But again, I have to say, when I look at Australians travelling overseas, I see certain things as well. I think that we can be perceived in similar ways, or come across as being a bit entitled sometimes. I don't know that I would say we're seen as being particularly brash, but there are certain perceptions about Australians that I don't think come across particularly well overseas either. So I wouldn't say it's something that's particularly exclusive to Americans.
True, yeah. It's not a purely American thing, but it's noticeable. You could
Yes,
you could just say,
yes,
yeah, it's
yeah.
noticeable.
I mean, I just think, Westerners in third world countries can be perceived as being, I guess, a bit brash or a bit, I don't know about snobbish is the right word, but a bit, elitist could be. Yeah, I hope that that's not the way foreigners perceive me when I travel. But yeah, I guess we can come across as being a little bit entitled at times. And some of it, I think, is just when you haven't experienced another culture before, you don't really know how to behave. But then the more time you spend there and the more time you travel, the more you start to realize this and kind of, as John says, he's kind of aware of how he comes across and he sort of makes adjustments for that when he travels. Yeah, it's not something I'm always conscious of, but yeah, when I'm traveling overseas, I tend to, I guess, try and keep a lower profile as I would describe it, to not stick out or to not feel as if I'm better than anyone else or more entitled. I just, I guess, try and fly under the radar or try and fit into the culture a little bit. I don't think I'm necessarily always successful at it, but I at least try.
I think other people would notice the
Mm,
effort. Frankly, Nathan,
mm,
I'm pretty sure that there are a lot of things that other countries would actually not just dislike but hate about, just the idea of being an American.
mm.
I can imagine a place like Afghanistan.
Yes.
They've been in a war. By the way, I mean, if you're listening to this and you're not aware that America was at war with Afghanistan and Iraq, I mean,
Hmm.
please just Google them. Okay, yeah.
There's plenty
Um,
of information out there.
yeah, those things really happened. I mean,
Mm,
I hope you're not, part of the few who, I don't know, who are staying somewhere really isolated and you never really knew that. But okay,
hmm.
for instance, here in the Philippines, I can mention two homicides
Wow.
that were reportedly committed by Americans here in the Philippines against Filipinos. So
Hmm.
one event I can mention is, okay, so here in the Philippines, we have a celebrity actress named Nida Blanca.
Hmm.
And she was a very popular TV and movie personality. It just so happened that she got married to a certain Rod Strunk. He's an American.
Hmm.
And sometime during I think 2 decades ago, um, wait, let me just confirm that. Wait, let me just confirm that. Yeah, uh, the actress I was talking about, Nida Blanca, she
Hmm.
died in 2001. So turn
Whoa.
of
Okay.
the century. Her body was found in the trunk of her own car, and she was apparently murdered. And after the police investigated, suspicion turned to Rod Strunk, her husband.
Hmm.
A lot of evidence pointed to Rod Strunk's culpability, his guilt. But eventually, he's an American. He holds an American passport, so he
Hmm.
was able to go back to the U.S. and evade authorities, and he practically escaped facing the consequences of his wife's death. And that got a lot of attention because, of course, we're talking about a celebrity in the Philippines.
Sort of appears to be above the law, or is able to get away with murder.
And I can also mention another fairly recent event involving an American serviceman named Joseph Scott Pemberton. So he was a Marine. Oh, actually, he was a Lance Corporal in the Marine Corps,
Hmm.
and he was deployed in the Philippines sometime during the 2010s. And being a lonely guy while here in the Philippines, he went out during his free time to many bars, nightclubs, maybe. During his travels over there, while having maybe drinks with
Hmm.
friends, he met Jennifer Laude. Jennifer Laude is actually a transgender female,
Hmm.
so not a biological female, but
Hmm.
of course, because of the sex modification, Jennifer Laude appeared to Joseph Pemberton as a biological female.
Hmm.
She dressed and looked like a biological female. And yep, they got together during the night they met, and
One thing led to another.
somehow one thing led to another, and they wound up in a hotel room or some other
Mhm.
private form of accommodation. Joseph Pemberton discovers Jennifer Laude to be transgender,
Mhm.
and so he eventually killed Jennifer. And yes, this was big news because he admitted to killing Jennifer, and he actually went to detention. He was detained in the Philippines for quite some time. But this happened in 2014.
Okay.
So from 2014 onwards, Joseph Pemberton was in jail. He
A
had to
life
be
sentence.
convicted, and I think that was the story. He was convicted and he was serving out his sentence.
Yes.
Sorry if I got some details wrong, but eventually what happened was he was serving his sentence, and during the pandemic, suddenly the news got out that Joseph Scott Pemberton, a convicted killer, was sent back to the United States in
Okay.
reportedly in exchange for COVID-19 vaccines
Wow.
from the US. So it was
Mm.
like an exchange, a prisoner in
Yes.
exchange for medical help. That's another thing that rankles the collective memory of many Filipinos. There are many more,
Mm.
but how about you, Nathan?
Yes.
I'm not sure if there were maybe something similar in Australia you could recall.
No, I don't recall any particular stories about
Oh, how
Americans
about
in particular, but
how about Johnny Depp and his dog?
oh yes, of course. That was an interesting one. So Johnny Depp was filming part of the Pirates of the Caribbean series or franchise in Australia, and yeah, he and his wife at the time they flew into Australia in a private jet, and they brought their dogs with them without declaring to customs that they had two dogs with them. And like when you're bringing animals in or plant matter in from overseas, obviously you have to declare it because they can bring in diseases and things which can affect flora and fauna in Australia and things like that. So we have very strict laws about this. And of course, they just flew in a private jet with their two dogs and thinking that nothing was wrong, and got caught and eventually had to apologise to the Australian people on a video message, I guess it was, for their mistake. So that was a good one, actually. I'd forgotten about that, so I'm glad you brought that one up. That was perceived as being quite arrogant.
Oh,
A
you heard
sort
it
of
all on social media, right? You heard
Oh
about it.
yes, yeah. It was in our mainstream news, and so everyone was quite aware of it at the time. And I don't know that I would say that's Australians just thought, oh, that's typical American. That's a typical
Okay.
American thing to do, of their brashness and their rudeness and their feeling of entitlement. But it was definitely they're celebrities, they're wealthy celebrities, and they're from Hollywood, and so they think they're entitled, that sort of thing. Not necessarily just because they're from America, though. Just a Hollywood thing, I guess. So it's
Okay.
interesting that John talks about how people perceive New York as to be in parts of America, other parts of America. I think you could probably say the same about Hollywood celebrities all around the world.
That did come to mind.
And yeah, Hollywood celebrities, they probably do live up to that stereotype a bit, or they can. I'm not suggesting they're all like that, but people just sort of bow down to them because they're better than us. And then there's a thing in Australia where we don't like people who think that they're better than us, and so we try and sort of cut them down to size as a I guess a kind of Australian way of dealing with these people.
I can also mention another experience I had while I was in
Mm.
Australia.
Yes.
And this is very interesting. I was able to meet a Bahraini. Sorry
Hmm.
if I muddle the
No.
pronunciation, but from Bahrain. Uh,
Hmm.
and he told me that in Bahrain,
Mhm.
Well, I'm just going by what he said. Okay, please don't attach any sort of
No,
particular.
just that's fine. Just go
I'm
ahead.
just relaying what he said.
Yep.
That in Bahrain, it's the American government who actually sponsors or assists the repressive government there. That was according to him. It's like in
Okay.
Bahrain, there is a repressive government,
Hmm.
and in large part because of the support that the U.S. gives to this government, that
Hmm.
a lot of Bahrainis are actually oppressed, and that a lot of Bahrainis actually had to move out of Bahrain to escape the oppression they received from their own government.
Mm.
So this fellow I was talking to was actually telling me that in that situation, America seems part of the bad guys,
Yes.
and that's one of the reasons why he feels that. Well, he told me that he doesn't like America. That's what he said.
Yes.
So I was worried about this friend of mine actually. I was worried about how they were going to behave if they ever came across Americans. It's really
Yes. Mm.
it's a sticky situation.
It
It
is.
can be hard
Yes.
to find yourself in the middle of it. And
Yes.
maybe, the one about Johnny Depp and the dog, that was a bit
Mm.
funny.
Mm.
But we've also talked about, really, really,
Serious things. Yeah.
but I hope it doesn't surprise a lot of people that if you want to hear the worst about Americans, the best source are the Americans themselves.
Yes.
They're the
Yes.
ones
Mm.
who like to tell the world about the worst things they've done. That
Yes. So
work.
at least they're honest, and at least
I
they're aware of it, and
you told me that you watched American movies, you're aware of American TV shows,
Mhm.
and
And it's particularly, I find it interesting, particularly in comedies. It's sort of a humor that I guess is self-deprecating. It's looking at your own culture and poking fun of your own culture.
and I had to ask John. You have all these other people saying that they dislike America, or maybe they dislike Americans.
Mhm.
You also have fellow Americans disliking on each other.
Mhm.
He is an American. Why does he think that we should still like Americans? I mean, you
Mhm.
don't like each other, right?
Mm.
One thing I noticed is there's no other group of people more critical of Americans, actually, than Americans themselves. When Americans talk about what they hate about each other, they're just really down there to the bone, right? They really mention things that even I can imagine fellow Americans could see about each other. And
Yeah.
you do often see, even in American movies and TV, there are some American characters there that are really just vile. So, as an American, talking to non-Americans, can you really just tell us in your own words, why should we still like Americans after all of that?
So, the reason why you should still like Americans is a very simple reason. For the reason that you should not judge anybody by their race or where they come from. Because it's just false. It's just false to believe that you and me, Reggie, I don't feel like we're fundamentally different. You feel like a person I would hang out with. American, Filipino, I don't give a shit. I don't care. And so the reason why you shouldn't judge Americans is because it's freaking racist.
Well, let me be.
Do you agree with that? Do you agree with that, Reggie? Do you see the same thing?
Well, I've been interviewing people from different backgrounds for the past episodes, and I've encountered many people from different parts of the world, and I haven't had really any disagreements with how one group would treat their circumstances. So, this certain group has to survive, has to thrive, and they have to do it this way. I don't see it should have been any problem with anyone else. When you're both just trying to, make the most of what you have, then there's a common language that you need each other and you can help each other. It appears time and time again.
Yeah.
Most especially when you're just at work and there's a task and you have to do it.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
find working together, it working together works. And you don't have to think
Yeah.
of that person's, I don't know, beliefs, or it doesn't belong there. because the task is the task. And when you work together, so you sort of get the appreciation growing between each other. You have to keep that sort of level, and it really moves forward from there. But that's my experience, you know.
All we have is our experience. What I find what you're saying is a very beautiful on a deeper level. From what I understand, of evolution, I don't know how useful these things are in human behavior, but we are, as we all know, pound for pound, the weakest animal in the animal kingdom, right? Like a dog that's, whatever, a 20-pound dog could probably kill us. 50-pound dog, definitely, even though I weigh 150 pounds, right? So it's faster than me, it's more dangerous, right? So the only way that we survive is we make a team. That's the only way. And so that's why there's a beauty in what you said. We have a task to accomplish. I believe, I hate the word believe, and I'll get to that in a second, that we are at our best when we're working together to complete something, because I think it is who we are, right? It is who we are. Me and Red, we work together to make audiobooks together, and I appreciate that, right? Or if you're working together to make a meal, or if you're whatever it is that you're doing when we're working together, I find that we all tend to kind of relax, and like you said, we don't worry about our beliefs. And one of the things that I worry about our beliefs is that our beliefs, they aren't true until we believe them, and then they are true, which can be good or it can be bad. If I decide all Filipinos are bad, good, whatever it is, then I come in with a belief and I will make it true. If I believe you're an asshole, I'm going to come in like this and it's going to piss you off and you're going to be an asshole, right? And so I think we need to be very careful about. That's why the benefit of the doubt is so important, right? And why, belief, in my belief, it's a strange thing to say, is a very dangerous thing. It can be really great and it can be really bad. Like I opened up with, belief is the heart of the American culture. What makes us great as a culture is we believe we can do anything. And then what's scaring the hell out of us is these last couple generations are the first time we've ever started to question, can I actually do anything? So that's something that's breaking our culture, and it's scary to us.
Oh man, that was heavy. But
Mm.
the real antidote there is just to practice the golden rule, right? I mean, do as you would to others,
Mm.
what you want others to do to you, right? I mean,
That's right. Like if someone from overseas, or if I was traveling to another country and people think I'm like somehow like Crocodile Dundee or something, and then I don't know, they have some sort of prejudicial view of me or something, and they act that way, or they see me as an other, or they see me as some type of enemy, and then they approach me in a way that's somehow a bit angry or something. Well, then obviously I'm going to start wanting to naturally defend myself. And they look at you and go, see, that's exactly what they're like. They start pointing the finger then. But in a sense, it's because they're not aware of the way that they're treating you.
it's
And
really
never judge a book by its cover is it's a true thing. We often have these perceptions of people, but once you the more time you spend with them, the more time you get to know them, the more you're able to sort of break down barriers and realize that a lot of the things you think about them, or all the stereotypical ideas you had about a particular person or particular nationality isn't true.
it's still better to be kind than to jump the gun. Still,
Exactly.
yeah, it's way much better to be open, to be accommodating,
Mm-hmm.
rather than should I say this, be too brash.
Yes.
And interestingly, yeah, you did mention that there are some people, not just Americans, but just some people who really just don't want good rapport. It seems like
Yes.
you've tried everything, but they're the resistant ones. And there are really some Americans who are not like John. There are some Americans in reality, it's hard to deny,
Mm-hmm.
are really closed.
Closed-minded.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what
But there
I.
are, but there are also closed-minded Australians, and there are probably, I'm guessing, there are closed-minded Filipinos, and everywhere you go, there in the world, there are people like that.
Yeah. So I put the question at least to John. As an American yourself, well, for me, I'm a Filipino, and I know some Filipinos who really aren't that great to be around with. Yeah, they're fellow Filipinos, but it's just better that I keep them with me instead of with non-Filipino. When we were talking earlier about some parts of the population that might exhibit, the worst that others might expect from your part of the world. Would you have any advice to people who might come across someone like that?
Yeah, that's interesting. One of the things I've found is that those attitudes come from ignorance. Someone may not like Filipinos, but they've never met one. So how do you know that? Your friends may not like Americans, but have they ever met an American? And I understand that they don't like what America does in the world, what America and now you're disagreeing with the government of America. I am not the government of America. I ain't. Any more than you're the government of the Philippines. You guys have some really interesting leaders.
True. Oh yeah, let me just remind you what he was referring to. You know that
Mm,
even Australia would be aware of one of our presidents
mm,
who waged the war on drugs and even called other world leaders nasty
mm.
names, who
Yes.
actually cussed out other leaders. And yeah, I kind of feel what he's saying. I'm not
Mm,
government. I'm just a Filipino.
yes.
One of our presidents was actually made Donald Trump look like a choir boy or something.
Yes.
I don't judge you on that. Are you the government? No, you're not. So for me to come to you and say, your president is a jerk, well, it's not your problem. It's not you. I'm not judging you. And anytime I'm working with a person and I'm not working with them, I'm working with a belief about who I think they are, it's a problem. And that's the only thing, that I would say about that is the people that I've found who don't like anything are ignorant of it. All right. If I don't, or not anything. I mean, I hate onions and I know onions very well, but so I don't mean that. but I hate Filipinos.
Misinformed people, misinformed
Yeah, I
individuals.
hate
You're
Filipinos.
referring to them.
Have you met a Filipino? Well, no. I mean, I hate Hispanics. Have you met a Hispanic? I mean, it's crazy. They're the same. They're all the same, right? Now, again, judging our posture in the world politically, that's a different animal. But we can talk about that. We can talk about the policy perspectives of a country. That's completely different.
I mean, if you encounter an American that, like I said, would be similar to a Filipino who wouldn't exactly be good company, would you say that you just leave them alone? Would that be the best
Yeah.
thing to
See,
do?
one of the things is that I don't believe, Reggie, it's not our job to change people. People only change when they want to change. All right. An alcoholic doesn't stop drinking until they want to stop. A smoker doesn't stop smoking until they stop. I ain't going to say stop it. They're going to say screw you. That's our natural reaction. All I can do is and I don't know if this might be a Martin Luther King Jr. quote again, is I can be the change I want to see. Right? I can be the change. If I don't like Americans, or don't like well, why don't I be what I think they should be? Why don't I be kind? Why don't I be, right, deferential?
That just sounds brilliant, and I really enjoyed your insight
Thank you.
for this episode. Yeah, it's
Thank you, Reggie.
absolutely. I think it's absolutely essential that more people just get to know each other better.
Judging me because I'm American is exactly like me judging you because you're Filipino. Whatever you think an American is, or whatever I think a Filipino is, It doesn't matter what I think. What matters is what you are. And so I try not to think anything before I go in, except be nice. John, be nice.
Yeah, that rings well with you too. Like how some people can be incorrigible. So, you don't have to deal with them. You just make yourself better.
Yes. Yep.
That's how I would see myself acting if I do encounter maybe someone, like he said, misinformed, somebody who already has prejudicial beliefs.
I mean, John said it so beautifully that I can't think of. I kind of have nothing to add in the sense that
Yeah, yeah.
he said it so well himself, but simply I agree. And I mean, I guess when we talk about this idea of Americans not being likable people, well, I mean, I've met plenty of Americans I like. I'm sure there are Americans out there I might not like. I think it's the same of Australians. There are plenty of Australians I like, plenty of Australians I don't like. If I travel to the Philippines, I'm sure I would meet a lot of really lovely Filipinos, and I might meet some I might not like either. So it's
It's just a
it's something
matter
that
of
happens everywhere.
recognize.
Yeah.
And I wanna, I
Mhm.
wanna return to what was mentioned earlier about how John and I talked about completing tasks
Yeah, sure.
in its most grassroots sense, you could say. Like when you're both just trying to, make the most of what you have, then there's a common language that you need each other, and you can help each other. It appears time and time again.
Yeah.
Most especially when you're put in the situation where you wouldn't think of anyone else's background. It's just like you're there. You're just at work, and there's a task, and you have to do it.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
find working together, working together works. And you don't have to think
Yeah.
of that person's, I don't know, beliefs, or it doesn't belong there, because the task is the task. And when you work together, you sort of get the appreciation growing between each other. And it really moves forward from there. And I feel that, Nathan, we're
Mhm.
part of this. We're part ourselves of at least one task
Yes.
here at Unshocked. We're part of
Mm.
informing people from everywhere about how
Mhm.
wonderful it is to actually be different.
Exactly right.
Yeah, how wonderful differences are, and how
Mm.
differences actually work together.
Exactly right. Yes. And it's exactly
And
what John said, how he describes diversity as being, as you say, differences working together. And the world can work better because of our differences too. If we learn to understand that difference is not a bad thing.
exactly.
And
I
also, I
I
think, the more time you spend with people, the more time you get to know somebody that's different than you, the easier that becomes. So, spend time with people that are not like you would be some advice I would give.
and especially now, we're this type of podcast, but there are many other podcasts out there who just
Mm,
seem to want to separate people from each other. There,
exactly.
there are many podcasts out there who say that we should become isolated again
Mm, mm,
and refuse to accommodate others who are
mm,
not of our background.
mhm,
It's really part of, I think, everyone's task to just inform ourselves, get informed about each other.
mhm.
And I do appreciate that John was around for this episode. I do appreciate that we have many more opportunities to fulfill the task of making everybody like each other even better. It's still an open discussion, really. We would welcome any comments, suggestions, and any points of view from our audiences, whether you're watching this or you're just listening to this.
Mhm.
So it's our pleasure to hear from you, because yes, discussions like this can continue, especially now that there's a transition happening in the US. I think that this same discussion will still remain relevant. Thank you to John Cheery. Nathan and I will be interviewing him again because we still have another, good old USA, USA. There's still a very interesting topic. We're going to return to them. This certainly has been very enjoyable,
It has
Nathan.
been.
Would you like to say anything else to the audience?
Try and spend time with people that are different than you, I guess, would be my advice to people. And the more you do that, the more you'll sort of break down barriers and prejudices, and I guess learn to like people more.
Yeah, actually.
I don't know, that just sounds dumb.
Yeah, you can still boil it down to those simple words, right? It's
Yep.
still better to like people
Mhm.
from whatever background they may
Mhm.
be.
Mhm.
They're the same as you and I.
We're not that different. No matter where you are around the world, I think we all want the same things deep down inside. So, yeah, that's it.
Watch out for our second episode about the USA. And so, goodbye, Nathan. I really loved this discussion. Let's see each other again.
Thanks once
And
again for having me, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
goodbye, everybody. See you next time. Next episode will be just as enjoyable, just as eye-opening. We will be talking about news and information and the challenges of knowing which of them are fake. I invite everyone to watch out for that, and I hope this itself won't be a fake out. I'll upload that as soon as I finish it. By the way, somewhere out in the world, it's going to be summer. And speaking of summer destinations, you might like to check out our Season 2, Episode 7, the episode just previous to this one, for an astoundingly beautiful beach option. It's a discussion about one particular spot of tropical paradise that's worth looking at more closely. Once again, that's Episode 7, just the one before this. And our thanks to Bao Waiko for being a most gracious guest. Given that the program is really part of a personal effort from basically two people, I'm still finding it difficult to put up a presence in many social media platforms. But for the meantime, I've provided our Facebook link and our Gmail address in the description section. It's also just as convenient for you, our audience, to simply post your feedback directly as comments on this episode in whatever platform you're on. And please be kind. Yes, you can disagree with us at Unshocked by all means, but don't hate, please. Thanks to John Cheery and Nathan Wilson for taking the time for this episode. Thanks to Kevin MacLeod for our music, as always, and incompetech.com. Again, we have lots of episodes in our archive for you to check out after this. And until next time, prepare to be unshocked.